Hello, it's Kim here, and I'm here to share my 4 steps to emotional alchemy. So, our agenda for today is going to be looking at why emotional mastery is absolutely crucial if we want to be happy and we want to be healthy. And then I'm going to be sharing, actually, rather than the 4 steps, the 5 steps to emotional alchemy, and the 10 most important emotions which we need to alchemize in order to create and maintain happiness. And then at the end, I'm going to be sharing a brand new program which is launching at the end of November, where you can learn how to manage and master and dissolve and transform your emotions on demand. So let's look at the word alchemy, because I've named this program Emotional Alchemy for a very specific reason. And alchemy is an ancient or an old word, a medieval term, which means chemistry, or the forerunner of chemistry. So alchemy, and it's concerned with the transmutation of matter. And normally people tend to think of alchemy as being an attempt to convert base metals into gold, or to find a universal elixir. So there are many different levels of understanding this word alchemy. So at a very base level, we could say at a physical material world level, it is the transmutation of one physical element into another element. But when we talk about alchemy in personal development terms, and in particular in terms of transforming energy inside our body, and emotions are energy, then it's about transforming that energy from one state to another. And ultimately, as human beings on our path of evolution, we're here to transform ourselves into a much, much different version of ourselves. And eventually, the first gate, if you like, to arrive at is what is called self-realization or enlightenment. And this is what all spiritual teachers talk about. So we're here to evolve and change ourselves internally, to transform and transmute ourselves internally, so that we literally experience ourselves completely differently internally. And emotional alchemy is an absolute critical part of this transformation. So when we're talking emotional alchemy, it's really about the art of transforming our feelings and our emotions, which are an internal energy. And the point of this is so that from an emotional perspective, we, or you, become the master of your emotional well-being. And when you do that, that means you have control of your feelings and what is going on inside of you, even when what is happening is outside your control. In other words, you have control of external events through being able to manage your internal environment. So whatever is happening outside, or is coming to you from your outside environment, you're able to control how you feel about that. And we also have our internal environment, which often has nothing to do with anything external, and has more to do with what's happened to us in our past, and our programming and our conditioning. And emotional alchemy also helps you to be able to manage and master that as well. So why do self-processing tools and emotional intelligence matter? Now, emotional intelligence has been quite a buzzword for a few years now, but from what I've observed, many people talking about emotional intelligence, they're not really deep diving into how to really process emotions, emotional energy. They're coming at it from quite an intellectual perspective. What I teach people to do is to come at it from an experiential perspective, where you're really connecting in to yourself deep inside and learning how to know how you're feeling at any given moment and know how to process negative emotional energy out of your body on demand. So what happens if we're not able to do this? Well, here are a few things that you're likely to be experiencing, because these will be the knock-on effects, if you like, of not being emotionally masterful. You may be experiencing roller coasters of emotions. So up and down, up and down, up and down. Sadness, anger, fear, frustration, hurt, disappointment. You may be experiencing them ongoingly or up and down, or you go through periods and it just never seems to stop. You may be experiencing general unhappiness, because if we have negative emotional energy lurking around inside of us, it all adds up to a general feeling of unhappiness. So even though, you know, your life might be going really well on paper, you might have a great job, you might live in a nice house, you might live in a nice area, you've got nice friends. It's like on paper things should be okay, but you don't feel okay. And that will be a sign that there are negative emotions trapped somewhere in your body. You might find that you can't get ahead in life and you're not really making progress. You may find that you have difficulty relating with people. Maybe you have a partner that you're not getting on well with. Maybe you're not getting on with your children, your parents, maybe people at work. And this will be a sign that there is some stuck emotional energy, along with probably some other things like limiting beliefs and maybe some past trauma and various other things. You may find that you have difficulty speaking your truth or standing up for yourself or saying no. It's like you may be in a situation where you want to say something and you feel a certain feeling, but you're unable to speak your truth. You may have frequent emotions such as frustration, disappointment, sadness, grief, fear, hurt, betrayal. These are the type of emotions that you're likely to be feeling. Also, you may be experiencing anxiety, stress, depression, insomnia. And most people don't realize that anxiety and depression are not emotions. They're a consequence of having negative emotions inside the body which are not being cleared. And so is a lot of stress, and so is a lot of insomnia. So these are the type of things that are likely to be turning up in your life that you don't want, but they're just not going. And it's a sign that there's going to be something emotional going on underneath. You may be experiencing sickness and ill health and not getting better, and you don't understand why it is that you're not getting better. Now, being ill is a very clear indication that there are some emotional issues at play. And in 12 years of working with clients with serious illness, I've not yet worked with one person who did not have some unresolved emotional issues. And those issues would either be from the present or from the past. And if there are unresolved emotional issues in the present, then they're directly linked to the past. So it's so important to understand the enormous role that negative emotions play in the creation of physical symptoms. And this is a big, big missing piece in most people's health. So for example, I'm in a couple of groups. One, for example, I think it's on digestive health and gut issues, leaky gut, this sort of thing. And also in another group, which is for functional medicine, which is more for doctors and practitioners of functional medicine. And what I see all the time is people looking for an answer in the physical realm. That they're looking for what is it I need to do because I've got XYZ symptom. What supplement should I take? What food should I eat? What food shouldn't I eat? And they're focusing purely on the physical, trying to solve a physical problem with a physical solution. And the problem is that is never ever going to fully work. If we don't address the emotional mind side of things, we are never going to bring our body back to health, because our body is a totality of mind, body, spirit, physical, mind, body, emotions, spirit, and energy. So 5 core components. And if we don't address all these areas, we're not going to get our health back. So it's so important to understand, we've got to look at the emotional side of things. And for myself and for working with hundreds of clients over the past 12 years, I found that the emotional component is a very, very big segment. So if you had a pie chart and you had to assign, well, what is the role that emotions play in the creation of physical symptoms, that pie segment would be a much bigger segment than any other reasons. So what exactly are emotions? Well, in the dictionary, they're called a strong feeling which derives from one's circumstances, mood, or relationships with others. Well, obviously that's a very general definition. But really what emotions are is they are physical and energetic sensations which come from inside the body. They don't come from outside, they're inside us. And they are a physical feeling or sensation, and they're an energetic feeling or sensation. And in the Emotional Alchemy 101 program, we go much deeper into what are emotions physically and energetically. But just for the sake of this webinar, just to be aware that emotions are sensations inside the body, which come from different places inside the body, even different organs inside the body. And actually, they are a feedback system. They're a form of feedback from us to us. It's an internal feedback system so that we can understand what is right for us, what isn't right for us, and how to lead our life in a healthy, beneficial way. So we have to learn to be able to interpret this feedback system. And most people don't know how to do this. They've never been taught to do this. It's not been taught to them when they were growing up at home. They weren't taught it at school, and they just don't know. And because negative emotions are not pleasant to feel, what most people do is they just push it aside, stay in their head, and get on with their busy life. But there's a problem here with if we don't manage our emotions. As I said, many people don't know what they're feeling. They're also afraid of feeling their feelings, and they're afraid of showing their feelings, and they don't know how to clear their feelings and emotions. This is an epidemic. It's an absolute epidemic. When I start working with people, sometimes they don't know how to label what they're feeling. So for example, they don't know that they're sad. They don't know they're angry. They're afraid of feeling angry or sad. They're just cut off from that side of themselves. But the problem is that emotions that are inside our body, once they're generated, because a law of physics states that once energy is created, it can't be destroyed. Once emotional energy is triggered and generated inside the body, it won't just disappear. It will stay there until we deal with it. And this is why it's so important to know how to process our own emotions. When we have all these emotions, life is not fun. We can be unhappy. We can be sick. That means that we can't enjoy our life. If we're not feeling happy, it could be the most beautiful sunny day and you just feel absolutely crap inside. And that is just not fun. So if you have tools that can enable you to process your emotions on demand, that means that you can process those feelings away in seconds or minutes and you can get on with your day. And obviously, if we have a load of emotions inside of us and we're not feeling happy, then eventually when things get really bad, then we just start to wonder, what's the point? What's the point? Is there any point in even continuing on? And that's when we get into the realms of real severe anxiety and depression. So who am I to talk about this topic? Well, I have been through a long journey of learning how to process emotional energy. And it started when I was 28, when I was diagnosed with depression. And at that point, I'd never even heard of the word, depression. And I didn't even know I was depressed. Somebody else pointed it out to me and said, I think you need to see a counselor. So I started to see a counselor and really didn't understand what anything we were talking about meant. And after a while, I started to understand that there were these things called emotions, and that I had emotions inside of me that I didn't know were there, and they were actually making me unhappy. And that the reason I had these emotions inside of me was because actually life had not been as happy as I thought it had been when I'd been growing up, because I thought I had quite a happy childhood. I enjoyed school, I played lots of sports, I had good friends. I thought I was happy. But as I was to discover through this depression, actually, I hadn't been happy at a fundamental level as a child at all. I'd actually been deeply unhappy, deeply hurt, deeply frustrated, etc., etc. And all those emotions that had been triggered inside of me in the first few years of life were still inside of me. And they had built up to become what is called depression. And depression is the depressing of emotions. And that is one thing that a lot of people don't understand. They don't understand that if they're experiencing depression, then there is going to be some element, most likely, of suppressing emotions. This set me off on a long journey of learning to understand myself and coming to understand myself in a much bigger way than I ever thought of before. And things got worse before they got better. So the depression turned into what is called clinical depression, which is quite severe depression. And I ended up in hospital with what is called a nervous breakdown. Now, many years later, when I put the pieces together, I actually came to understand that the breakdown was in fact a breakthrough of consciousness. It was a breakthrough to a new level of consciousness. But I didn't know that at the time. All I knew was that my mind felt like it was breaking down, and it was breaking down because the old consciousness, the old paradigm, was disintegrating to make way for a new one to be built, just like when a skyscraper has to be demolished in order to build a new skyscraper in the same place. So I went through this experience, which I didn't really understand at the time. All I thought was I was depressed. And I started to come through that to get my life back on track, so I thought. And then several years later, I started to get very tired. And over a period of 9 months, I was just getting more and more tired until one day I walked into work and I just quit. I hadn't planned it, but I just walked into work and I thought, I can't go on anymore. I'm just so exhausted, and I quit my job. And I went to the doctor and I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, or CFS, or ME. There's many different words for it. And I basically spent the next 5 years at home searching for answers, sometimes unable to get out of bed, sometimes unable to get out of the house, looking for answers, trying lots and lots of different therapies. And I tried over 140 therapies. But nothing seemed to be making a dent in the fatigue, and nobody could tell me why I was tired, even though I went to so many therapists. And after about 5 years, I was lying in bed one day, and the thought that came to me was, well, what if you never get better? And actually, what if you die? What would you do? What decision would you make right now if that was going to be what was going to happen? You know, if you only had 6 months to live, what would you do? And it was quite a radical thought, but at the time it just seemed quite real, because after 5 years of searching for answers and not getting any better, you do start to wonder, well, what is going to happen? And you do start to have doubts. And I've worked with many people who've been ill for longer than that. They've been ill for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. They've been in that situation. So it was only 5 years for me. But when I asked myself that question, the answer that came to me was, well, I would do that trip around the world that I've been wanting to do for years. Even if I'm not feeling well, you know, I just have to make the most of these last few months and live my life before I can't even get out of bed at all. And so I sold my house and I set off around the world, still not well, still having to crash here and there and be in bed. But I set off around the world, but I was still looking for answers. And at the end of that trip, I found the answers, and I had what I call my turning point. And my turning point moment was when I understood the connection between emotions and illness. So even though I'd been working on myself and I knew I had depression, or I'd had depression, I didn't have depression anymore at that point, but I understood the connection between emotions and depression. I hadn't understood the connection between emotions and physical symptoms. So I had a major insight and light bulb and turning point moment where I very, very clearly saw how the past and the hurt and the trauma from the past had meant that I was still suppressing emotions, and that suppressing of emotions was creating fatigue. So it wasn't that I didn't have enough energy, I actually had lots of energy. I was actually suppressing my energy, and specifically I was suppressing my emotional energy, and emotions are a form of energy. Everything is a form of energy. I'll go into this in much more detail in the emotional alchemy training, but if we suppress emotional energy, it will show up in one way or another in the body physically. And for me, it was showing up as a lack of energy. So once I learned this, I started to learn some really, really effective techniques for clearing emotional energy on demand. So every day I would sit myself down and I would do these exercises, and I did them every day for the next 7 years. Every day I did these techniques. And after about 5 years, I could say that I was 95% better, and I started to work, and I started helping other people who also had chronic fatigue and chronic pain symptoms, and they were in a similar situation to me where they had been looking for answers and nobody was able to help them. And so through showing them the connection between emotions and symptoms and then showing them what to do about that, they got their health back. And that's what I started to do 12 years ago. And since then, I've trained in many, many other therapies, and most of these therapies are to do with healing emotions. And I've since also created my own therapy, my own methodology. So this is my story to how I have learned how to really be on top of emotions and become what, and I don't say this lightly, but become an emotional master. So I love sharing this information, and I have spoken around the world at various conferences and won various awards. And you know, it's so important. I do this because it's so important to have this information out there and to have people understand the connection between stress, emotions, and physical health. What I'm going to do now is share what I call the 5 steps to emotional alchemy, and also the 10 most important emotions that we need to be able to master or clear on demand. So what's really important to understand is that emotions are not the same as thoughts. And what happens is, even though I know that you know that, a lot of people are trying to approach their emotions the same way they would approach thoughts. And this doesn't work, because emotions are irrational and thoughts are rational, and emotions can't be thought away. And that is what most people are doing. They're trying to think their feelings away, and it will never work. They're completely different things. So the first step is we have to be aware of what we're feeling. Now, this may seem or sound really obvious. Well, of course, I have to know what I'm feeling in order to be able to clear it. Well, the reason that I put this here is that a lot of people are simply not aware of what they're feeling, and I was one of those people. I would be going about my day and I would have no idea that underneath I would be feeling frustrated or hurt or sad or whatever it was, because I was so disconnected from what I was truly feeling. And this is the head-body disconnect. Most people spend most of their time in their head and they're completely disconnected from their body. And emotions are in the body, they're not in the head. So first of all, we have to know what we're feeling, and there are ways that we can do that. There are techniques that we can use to learn to become aware of how we're feeling, and that's what I'll be teaching in the program. Then we have to acknowledge what we're feeling. Emotions need acknowledgement without any judgment, and we have to unconditionally accept. And acknowledgement and acceptance are slightly different. Acknowledgement is sort of step A and acceptance is step B. But we must be able to acknowledge and accept how we're feeling without judging ourselves. And then we have to understand more about the cause. Now, this isn't actually a must for, not all the time, for dissolving emotions, but sometimes that it is important to understand where does this emotion come from. And again, I'll be going into this in much more detail in the training program. But we need to work out, why is it that I'm feeling this way? And it may be that it's what I call a surface level issue, which means it's in the present, or it may be something from the past, which is what I call the deep, and they're totally connected anyway. But we need to be able to understand, or it's very useful and sometimes essential to understand why am I feeling this way? Why is my body sending me this emotion? And then the last step, of course, is transformation or alchemization. We need to be able to clear or dissolve or transform this emotional energy. We need to be able to alchemize it so that it's no longer stored in our body, creating the feelings of whatever it is, the hurt, disappointment, anger, frustration. And there are certain tools that we can use to do that very, very quickly, easily, and effectively without going into fear. Because this is one of the things that stops people processing their emotions, is that they're afraid of them. And there are reasons for that, but once we learn that we don't have to be afraid of our feelings, then we can process them. So the 10 most important emotions that we need to learn how to dissolve or process or alchemize on demand are anger and the whole anger family, and there's a whole repertoire of anger emotions, sadness, hurt, disappointment, fear, loneliness, shame, guilt, betrayal, and boredom. So these are 10 key emotions or families of emotions that we must be able to manage and master by ourselves from the inside out in order to be happy and to be healthy, and then evolve on our path of personal evolution towards wisdom and self-realization. Now, you'll notice I didn't have anxiety and depression on that list, and that's because they're not emotions. They're the consequence of having undealt with emotions. And worry is also not on that list, because worry is also not an emotion, it's a habit. And we will talk more about that in the Emotional Alchemy program. So the thing with emotional alchemy is there's a difference between theory and experience. We can understand something intellectually, that's the thought side of things, or we can know how to do this experientially, which is more the emotional side of things. And a lot of people are very good at the theory, but not so good at the experience. In other words, they don't know how to do this in a real way. They understand the theory behind it, but they don't know how to implement the tools, strategies, etc., etc. So my question to you is, are you able to label what you're feeling at any given moment? Because we need to be able to do that. You need to be able to go inside of you or be inside of you and know at any given moment what feeling or feelings are turning around inside of me or lying on the surface that need to be dealt with. Because there are many, 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 many layers of emotions. It's like the strata of a, in geology when they show you the different layers of the earth. We have many layers inside of us, and we can only really be dealing with, the uppermost layers consciously. And as we strip away the layers, then we get to the layers underneath. The next question is, are you able to clear negative feelings on demand? Do you have strategies and tools to do that so that at any time that you've identified what you're feeling, you know how to process and self-process those feelings out of your body? So here are some of the things that people have said about these techniques. Evie was or is a pharmacist and a naturopath, and she said, I would never have been able to figure this out by myself. It's been priceless. And she came to me because she had anxiety and chronic fatigue, and she had been to doctors and therapists, and she could not work it out. What is it that's going on? And she didn't realize that she had a whole heap of unresolved emotions inside of her that were creating the anxiety and the fatigue. And once she understood how to work this out, she was able to obviously reduce her symptoms, but also reduce the anxiety. And when we're able to do this, then we no longer have to be on medication. And in general, medication is a plaster. It doesn't address the cause. And I'm all about teaching people how to address the cause of the problem and resolve things from a causal level, because if you resolve the cause, then the effects, which are the unhappiness and the symptoms, etc., they go away. And another lady said, wow, it's an almost indescribable joy to feel like I'm regaining the life I used to have. So we get back to our old self, but actually it's not our old self. We don't want to go back to our old self. We get a new self. We get a new and better self, and we're able to get on with our life. And our symptoms can go, if we deal with our emotions and we deal with whatever issues need to be dealt with, and it's not just emotions, there will be other things that we need to look at in our life. That's not the content of this webinar, but I have worked with hundreds of people who, through managing and mastering their emotions, they have completely cleared their physical symptoms. And this is why it is so important to understand the connection between trapped emotions and physical symptoms. And people understand, for example, that depression is not a weakness. Often we can feel a lot of shame around being depressed or having mental illness, and we shouldn't, because it's just the consequence of other unresolved stuff in our life that has a lot to do with unresolved emotional issues in our life. So when we learn how to clear our emotions, then all the other stuff clears up too. So I'm going to share my new Emotional Alchemy program, which is a self-empowerment program teaching how to master negative emotions. And I'm going to share, well, what will you learn and how will this benefit your life? Well, we're going to be talking about the science behind emotions and how they literally change our physiology, in other words, our organs, our tissues, our cells. You'll be able to learn how to label, identify, and clear uncomfortable negative emotions. You'll learn how it's possible to not feel afraid of feeling your feelings. And I'll be sharing the 4 core fears that humans have. So it's so important to understand. I know it can feel a little overwhelming maybe watching a webinar like this and thinking, oh my God, all these emotions of fear and hurt and disappointment and betrayal, oh my God, I'm going to go into overwhelm trying to clear all of this. No, that's not how it works. It's one step at a time, and as we become self-masterful, we don't have to be afraid of feeling our feelings. And you will learn how to manage these 10 core emotions: anger, frustration, fear, sadness, grief, hurt, disappointment, loneliness, boredom, betrayal, shame, guilt. And you will learn about the different families of emotions and how to differentiate between head and body, brain emotions. You'll learn about the 3 brains. You learn the difference between thoughts and emotions, and really how to tune into your body from the inside out. And easy, effective, fast self-help techniques for clearing negative emotional energy in seconds and minutes, so that you don't have to stay feeling emotional for months or years. Now, I'm not saying that every time you use these techniques they're going to transform that energy in seconds or minutes. Sometimes they do, sometimes it takes a little longer, but the point is it is possible to do it in seconds or minutes when you have the right techniques. So this program is not for anybody who wants to stay disempowered and doesn't want emotional freedom. And this program is also not for anybody who doesn't want to invest time and energy in their personal transformation, because learning how to become emotionally masterful is not an overnight endeavor. The program that I'm running will run for a couple of weeks, and then it will be on demand ongoingly for you. In other words, you'll be able to access all the materials and watch them on demand later after the initial 2-week live training. But this is a lifelong journey to emotional mastery, and depending where you are currently at in your personal development evolution will depend on, well, is this going to take a few months or few years or the rest of your life? I can't say that, but what I can say is that having these tools under your belt is absolutely essential if you want to learn how to get rid of emotions, and if you want to be happier, and if you want to be healthier. And they will work from the moment that you start using them. And it's the repetition of using these techniques that will transform your life, and the transformation just increases over time. So what will happen is that you will gain self-mastery over your emotional well-being, so that you're no longer at the mercy of your feelings. And you will feel in control of how you feel in any given moment, and also be able to start letting go of a lifetime of stored emotional energy. And you will feel strong and free, because you know that you have the power to transform your emotions from the inside out. And that also has a big effect on how you manage people around you and how you manage your environment. Because if things are happening in your environment and things are happening with people, whatever the internal response is inside your body, you can deal with it, you can manage it. You're not at the mercy of what is happening to you from other people in your life. And this is self-empowerment, and this is what I love to teach people. So the program is called Emotional Alchemy 101. As I said, it's a program which teaches you how to be in touch with your feelings and clear negative emotional energy on demand. And it gives you a set of tools that you'll have for your whole life, which will change your life for good. And from a practical perspective, it's a series of live classes with me and pre-recorded tutorials, where you can watch, obviously, the live classes live, or you can watch them on demand later in your own time. You can replay the classes and the tutorials as many times as you want. There will be 8 live classes plus at least 15 pre-recorded tutorials, and it's all accessible in a private membership portal which you can access 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. So the lessons look like videos, that you watch videos of me talking, and then everything is made into an audio file which you can download and listen to on your digital device, your phone, computer, whatever it is, so you can listen to it offline, and any relevant handout. And during the live classes, you'll be able to interact and ask questions, and then you'll also be able to submit questions in advance of the live classes. So it's a very comprehensive course in in how to manage and master your emotions.
So if you're interested in joining me in this program, we kick off on the 26th of November. It will run for a couple of weeks, and it will literally give you tools that you will have for the rest of your life to manage your emotions. So I hope you join me, and I look forward to seeing you in the program.